Hey guys, welcome back to my YouTube channel. It's been a while since I made a video. I've been away due to being a little bit sick. It's allergy season where I'm from, so darn those allergies, but what can you do? Life goes on. So let's cover Game 3 of Kasparov versus Deep Blue. In Game 3, Kasparov has the white pieces, and let's just go right for it. Kasparov plays d3, so the Mises opening. Very, very uncommon. I believe this is the first time any world champion has ever played this opening on this type of scale. You just don't see it. It's not that it's necessarily bad, but there's better first moves, such as 1 e4 and 1 d4. e5. Deep Blue goes right for the center right away. Very logical. Opening up the bishop, queen, and capturing some central presence. Knight f3. Attacking the pawn. And Deep Blue simply defends the pawn with knight c6. His other option to defend it was d6, but that prematurely locks in the bishop on f8, so knight c6 looks right here. c4 by Kasparov. So now we're transposing into the English opening, which normally starts off with c4. So the Mises opening does have a lot of transpositional ideas in mind. Excuse me, guys. Knight f6. Responding with development. Controlling some center squares here. Very, very natural moves here by Deep Blue. Which is odd to say because Deep Blue is the computer. So I'm not sure how natural fits in, but there you have it. a3 by Kasparov. Interesting move. So now you see that Kasparov is adopting almost a Sicilian-like structure with white. How does Deep Blue respond to this? d6. So Deep Blue did have some options here. One option would be to play d5 and open up the game right away. And then it would be Deep Blue playing the white side of the Sicilian and Kasparov playing the black side, but with one extra tempo. Deep Blue didn't like this idea, so he went for... Deep Blue went for more of a solid, safe defensive move. Perhaps he didn't... like the idea of being one tempo behind in a reverse Sicilian. I know I don't like that idea myself when I have to play reverse openings. I don't like the idea of being one move behind. It kind of throws me off. Knight c3. Kasparov's developing here. Bishop e7. Now that you can see with d6 being played, Bishop e7 here doesn't look quite right. I think better here would have been g6, bishop g7, and then castle. That looks like a better plan here, because I don't see what the bishop can really do on e7 here. It's, it could potentially stop pins here. It's quite defensive and almost like a big pawn at this point. So I think the fianchetto idea would have been better. g3. Speaking of fianchetto, Kasparov decides to go for a fianchetto. Castle short by Deep Blue. And bishop g2. Bishop e6. Very nice square for the bishop. The bishop has a lot of flexibility on e6. Guarding d5 for a potential d5 push or an invasion by the knight. And then it could always swing down to h3 or g4 in the future if necessary. Castles short by Kasparov. And queen d7. So Deep Blue's idea is very crude here. He wants to play bishop to h3 and exchange Kasparov's fianchetto bishop for his bishop. But Deep Blue misses a very straightforward idea by Kasparov, which is knight g5. After knight g5, bishop can't go to h3. So let's see how Deep Blue responds. Bishop f5. It appears that Deep Blue didn't really like the idea of losing his light squared bishop, so he plays bishop f5, keeping both bishops on the board. e4. So this is a very closing move. It kind of closes the center off and creates a lot of dark, mainly d4, the dark hole right here. So I believe Kasparov must have evaluated that the advantages he receives from playing e4 are greater than the disadvantages of playing e4. So, because this move is not flexible at all. There's no flexibility in it. Example, if Kasparov were to play e3, that'd be more of a flexible move. And then you could maybe go d4, b4 is an idea, or you could go e3 and in the future maybe go e4 later on. Sorry guys, take a sip of tea here. Allergy season. Gets me every year. So Kasparov decides to play this very straightforward approach, closing the center and gaining a tempo on the bishop. Bishop g4 by Deep Blue. And now f3. Kasparov could have went for a queen move here. Maybe queen c2. But Kasparov decides to maintain pressure and kind of the initiative of kicking around the bishop. The bishop's moved several times now, so he wants to keep that momentum going by playing f3. f3 it's an interesting move. It's actually quite good, but you notice how it blunts the bishop's scope of d5, and it also creates even more dark hole weaknesses. Bishop h5, and now h3. Knight h3. So the knight is rerouting to go to f2. Knight d4. Great square for the knight. Very classical square for the knight on d4 here. Can further be reinforced by c5 if necessary. Knight f2. h6. For h6 here, I would venture a guess, possibly stopping any bishop g5 ideas. The position is very slow-paced. It's a lot of little moves here, like you go here, I go there, you know, very slow maneuvering positions. Kind of seeing who can outmaneuver who. Bishop e3, putting some pressure on the knight, getting the bishop out. c5. So now Deep Blue decides to cement his knight into d4. Very, very nice knight. Notice how the pawn structure is symmetrical in this position right here. Typically in my games of chess, I don't like to play these types of pawn structures like that. I have done it many times, but I try to avoid it. I prefer more flexible positions that give me options. But that's just my style. b4. Undermining the knight by playing b4. Possibly taking away less pressure from less defensive protection on the knight on d4. Deep Blue simply reinforces by playing b6. And now rook b1. Getting ready for a b-file opening. King h8. Now, this move strikes me as a waiting move by Deep Blue. Almost like Deep Blue is saying to Kasparov, you know, what can you do? How can you advance your position? So it feels like a waiting move to me here. Rook b2. Not exactly sure what this accomplishes, but it does help with the second line defense. a6. Deep Blue's just inching his way ahead. Very, very small, little, minute moves. Okay, Kasparov decides to take on c5. B takes c5. And Deep Blue takes back. B takes c5. Now, finally, we have an open file. Kasparov's rook is sitting very nicely in the open file. Let's see if he can take advantage of that. First, he plays bishop h3, attacking the queen. So now we can see this knight maneuver that started with knight g5 back to h3 to f2. Now the bishop is on h3, protected by the knight. So that whole knight maneuver, it seemed to pay off well for Kasparov. Queen c7, sidestepping. And now bishop g4. I think Kasparov really had enough of this bishop here on h5, and he was hoping to have a trade. And Deep Blue wasn't ready for a trade yet. Bishop went back to b6, and now f4. Now Kasparov is starting to activate his position. 30 moves into the game. 21 moves into the game. Not sure where I got the 30 number, by the way. We can chalk that up to allergies if you like. As I said, f4, e takes f4, and g takes f4. Queen a5 by Deep Blue. Deep Blue is seizing the opportunity to fork the knight and the pawn, and it looks very hard for Kasparov to be able to defend both without playing something very passive. And Kasparov decides to give up the pawn, saying to Deep Blue, if you would like the pawn, go for it. So he defends his knight by bishop d2. And Deep Blue accepts and takes on a3. The queen, you can see, is quite far away from all of his other pieces in the game. So it's not like Deep Blue can mount some sort of attack with just the queen alone. So Kasparov is in no real danger from the queen being there. Rook a2. Now queen b3. Deep Blue offers a queen trade. And instead of accepting the queen trade on b3, Kasparov plays f5 first, shutting off the light squared bishop. Very nice move. Deep Blue decides it's time to take queens off the board. Kasparov takes back with the bishop. And now this bishop here needs to move away. Notice how Kasparov, he's gained quite a bit of tempos during this game. You know, on the bishop when the bishop was on e6, f5, g4, h5, g6. So Kasparov, he's generated a lot of tempi play. Okay, let's continue. Knight h3, rerouting the knight from h3. f4 looks like a very good home for it, and then possibly d5 in the future. Rook fb8, grabbing the open file by Deep Blue. Very logical. Knight f4, just like we talked about. Bishop back to d8. Bishop back to d8, helping to control c7, b6, and a5. And the knight hops into to d5. Very nice knight by Kasparov, and also a very nice knight by Deep Blue. Knight back to c6. It appears that Deep Blue feels like it was time to bring the knight back and reposition it, possibly repositioning it to e5 and then onto the pawn. This pawn, as you can see, is quite vulnerable. Bishop f4. Kasparov jumps on Deep Blue's weak pawn. And then Deep Blue simply plays knight e5, attacking Kasparov's weak pawn. Bishop a4, rerouting the bishop. The bishop has a very nice diagonal here. It seems like it could really become very active on that diagonal. Knight takes d5, and knight takes d5. a5. a5 is gaining some space on the queen side, but it does shut in his bishop on a5. So, but it does protect the pawn twice now. So possibly Deep Blue was worried about this pawn being weakened. So he decides to play to a5, and now it's protected quite well. Bishop b5, nice home for the bishop on b5. Looks good. Rook a7. King g2. Very, very slow positional game by both players. G5 by Deep Blue. So this is a kind of a striking out move by Deep Blue here. It's like Deep Blue is saying, I had enough of this slow maneuvering game. G5, I'm striking out. Show me what you got. Kasparov takes the knight on e5. Bishop takes e5 check. And pawn takes back. F6 by Kasparov. Very nice move. This bishop is even has less scope now. And he's kind of constricting the king's movement as well. However, it does open up the light square bishop and gives it a little bit of some breathing room. Bishop g6. Maybe trying to get some life on the h5 d1 diagonal. h4 by Kasparov. Looks like a pawn sacrifice because the pawn's not defended. However, after g takes h4, the king simply just moves up and grabs the pawn. King g8 by Deep Blue, and king takes h4. King h7 by Deep Blue, king g4, bishop c7, adding protection to the pawn on e5. Knight takes c7, and rook takes c7. Rook takes a5, and rook d8. Giving up a pawn on a5, but at the same time, Deep Blue now has really, really good pressure on d3. So the question is, how does Kasparov defend this pawn? He can't defend it with rook d1, because bishop can take on e4, then pawn takes, and then the rook drops. So Kasparov has to play this very defensive move. Rook f3. Now the rook is kind of permanently tied down to defend this pawn. And I believe that's what Deep Blue's idea was, to give up the pawn on a5, was to permanently lock down this rook onto this pawn. Or that's what it appears. King h8, rook a6, king h7, rook a3, king h8 by Deep Blue. So now we're going to get into a threefold repetition scenario. Rook a6. Kasparov can't find a way to advance his position without weakening it. And Deep Blue really doesn't have to do anything. Deep Blue's position is quite easily defendable just by moving his king back and forth. He's almost as if he's saying to Kasparov, if you want to win this game, you have to do something here. But Kasparov decides to offer Deep Blue a draw, and the programmers of Deep Blue, they accept the draw, and the game 3 ends on move 46. So that was game 3, and now the score is 1.5 to 1.5. And that's it for the video, and I hope you guys enjoyed it. And I'm working on my other, brain fog. I'm working on my other video, my beginner's opening repertoire, which will be uploading very soon, hopefully when I finish this series. So if you're a beginner out there and you're struggling in the opening, find yourself at disadvantages early on, then I'll definitely be able to help you with that with my beginner's guide to opening. Okay, guys, well, thank you for tuning into the channel, and I wish you guys a great night. So take care.